Okay, today we're going to look at question 2. Question 2 of the Cambridge 0522 GCSE IGCSE English language paper. Question 2 is a writing task. It's based on a text that you have read in the exam, and it can ask you to write in any style. This is the question that we're going to look at. Imagine that you are the narrator. On your return home, you write an article for a newspaper discussing what happened on the remote island. Write an article for the newspaper about your experience. In your newspaper article, you should describe what happened that night, your thoughts and feelings at the time, who or what your follower turned out to be, and what happened next. Already, you should be thinking, what type of text do I have to write? And it has to be an article for a newspaper. You need to be thinking about what the features are of an article for a newspaper. It needs to be factual and it needs to link to the text. Also, it's about your experience, so we would expect it to be in the correct pronoun. This question will always give you 3 bullet points. As well as reading this part of the question here, you must also pay attention to these 3 bullet points and make sure that you talk about these 3 bullet points. The bullet points are what happened that night, your thoughts and feelings at the time, who or what your follower turned out to be, and what happened next. It is so important that you base your ideas on what you have read in the passage. It may be a writing task, but you are still getting marks for reading. And you do not copy from it. That means you have to explain things in your own words. The good thing is that you may get a sentence starter. When I arrived on the island. It's so important that you read the whole question because the question is there to help you. Write between 1 and 1.5 sides, allowing for the size of your handwriting. I just quickly want to show where I got this exam paper from because I need to make sure that nobody thinks I'm stealing. Now back to the question. Up to 10 marks are available for the content of your answer, and up to, it says 10 marks here for the quality of your writing. Unfortunately, now there's been some changes. It will be 5 marks for the content, which means the reading, and 10 marks for the writing. Let's have a look at the mark scheme. Here we have the reading mark scheme. It is out of 5 marks. 1 mark, the response is difficult to understand. The response may be almost entirely lifted from the original. And by lifted, we mean copied. It's really important that you don't do that. You do not copy. For 2 marks, the response is very simply written. I felt, I liked, I didn't like. And there are occasional examples of blurred meaning. You have to make sure you read it back to yourself. Does it make sense? The structure can be followed, and the response may be over-dependent on lifted material. Band 3, sentence structures and vocabulary are simple. So to get into Band 3 and to get 3 marks, you must make sure that you have some variety of sentence types. But the meaning is never in doubt. It always has to be clear. The order is reasonable. Does it make sense from beginning to end? There may be an attempt at an appropriate register, but it is inconsistent. This word register is very, very important. Register is to do with how formal or informal your writing is. In this question, you're writing for a newspaper and you're writing an article. How formal do you think that should be? Does it sound like you're writing for a newspaper, or does it sound like you're writing for your friend? Band 2 for 4 marks. Sentences are correct, though relatively simple. Vocabulary is adequate and correctly used. Synonyms again, you must get them right. Structure is generally sound and register is appropriate. It's the right register. And to get 5 marks, your sentences have to be fluent, clear all the way through. There has to be a wide range of vocabulary. Overall structure is good and sentences generally flow in sequence, and an appropriate register is established. Looking at the writing, you'll see that if we start at about band 4, there is some relevance to the question, with a tendency to retell the passage rather than focus on the requirements of the question. If you want over a band 4, then you must make sure that you focus on what the question is asking of you and don't just retell the passage. For a band 3, 5 to 6 marks, repeat some details from the passage about the prize giving, shows incomplete understanding of the writer's feelings. That means you're only slightly talking about the feelings. You're not going into detail. It focuses on the question and passage, but it uses the material simply and partially. So you're not using all of the material. For band 2, 7 and 8, the important things to remember is several details, writer's feelings. There is also an appreciation of the reasons for taking the post and his possible concerns. So in order to get into band 2, you really need to understand the voice of the writer. You really need to understand what they're trying to say and what they're going through. For 9 to 10 marks, this is developed more. It uses several ideas, loads of ideas. Some of them are factual and some of them are inferential. You've looked beyond the obvious. You consistently reflect on the feelings. That means that you're always looking at the feelings. And you understand his reasons for accepting the post in the school and his possible concerns. So that's the mark scheme, and that's what you really need to be aiming towards when you're answering this question. If we have a closer look at the mark scheme, here, this is what the exam boards say about the mark scheme. The exam boards say that the most successful responses will derive convincingly from the text. The description of the follower and the narrator's response to it will be developed in some detail. There will be a sensible and credible attempt to bring the story to a conclusion. But be prepared to credit responses that end deliberately with a cliffhanger. So if you wanted to end with a cliffhanger, that's okay. But I would recommend that you try and make your article come to a conclusion. It is a news story after all. You're just giving the news. Less successful responses are likely to be over-reliant on the content of the original passage and to lift sections of it. I'm going to do that in a different colour because you shouldn't be doing this. Lift sections of it. You should not be taking exact words and phrases from the text. You have to develop your own suggestions. Develop your own meanings. Explanations that lack credibility or do not sustain the tone of the original are unlikely to gain a Band 1 mark for reading. So you have to make sure that you take on the sound and the voice of the person in the original text. Look for and credit an attempt to write in an appropriate register. The examiner is going to be happy if you try to write in the correct register, in the correct tone and style. That is pretty much what you need to do for question 2. The focus now really is just for you to write it. If you look on the next video, you'll have a read through of the text itself to help you tackle this question.